Critical race theory concerns the study of transformation and relationships among race, racism, and power. This theory is basically meant to question the very foundations of legal order. This contains an academic dimension as it attempts to both understand our social situation and change it. This can have a dramatic impact on our law enforcement and sentencing situations. Critical race theory has pretty much created more issues for our criminal justice system. It's basically taken racism and put it under a microscope. And it's given us the ability to conduct studies in certain areas and basically shed light on a lot of the areas where we're lacking. It focuses primarily on racism, and that is currently a big issue that we have in our systems. Um, but it's something that we very much need. And unfortunately, we live in a time where white elites have basically been given the power to define race. And this is something I read off of one of our readings, but it's where it stems from. It all started way back when. Anything other than the white race was treated differently and less, and since then has progressed. Currently, we have our criminal justice system in a position where it is not fair and just. It still has a lot of flexibility to do things the way they see fit. And this can have a negative impact, especially when it comes to racism. Unfortunately, the mentality that has been developed as a result of our history and our culture has negatively impacted our criminal justice system. And critical race theory brings all that to light, creating bigger problems. So, for example, our laws. Our laws are now being reviewed with a fine tooth comb and making sure that they're applicable to everyone, that it doesn't isolate a specific race or class, and that we're all treated the same across the board. Um, Enforcement, our police officers are put in situations these days where um, they're scrutinized. Um, One example I know we had in one of the studies that was done, there were 990 individuals that were killed by an officer. The portion of African Americans that were killed by an officer were 100% of the African Americans that were studied in that group were unarmed. Um, and in finding this, it sheds light on why did we go to such extremes? Why are we murdering African Americans and not holding these police officers accountable for it? So it basically sheds light on the negative things happening in our enforcement systems with our police officers. The other portion of it is sentencing. Um, Sentencing at this point, there's been a couple of studies conducted, and some find that there's no negative impact. Others find that, there is. But the reality of it is when you look at our criminal justice system, you know, a judge still has the ability to justify a desired result in any particular case, which means that even if the ruling was something different than what was granted, the judge can still go back and decide to change the ruling based off of whatever he justifies or sees fit. Giving someone this type of power is setting us up for issues in our criminal justice system. With our critical race theory, this sheds more light on all this information. The other topic that we were asked to discuss for our reading was the social concept of gender, race, ethnicity, and how our criminal justice system has proposed real world situations, and will they allow for a more equitable criminal justice system. In all of the items that we discussed, what stood out to me the most was the social construction approach. We've had many studies done, many theories developed to help us understand why the system does what it does and why things happen the way that they do in efforts to make our criminal justice systems equitable and fair. Um, and what I found in the social construction approaches was that a big part of our bias is basically on the public. For whatever reason, the studies that were found in that were that the African American communities um, were the ones making more calls reporting crimes versus the white community. And when calling them in, you're unable to fully describe an individual, which makes it really difficult to truly account for statistics and numbers and accurate reportings. So we have the public itself who is basically criminalizing one another by picking up the phone and calling. It could just be a dramatic incident or what have you, but it does create an issue for each other, and it does skew our numbers. The other issue that we have is police bias. And unfortunately, with the way our criminal justice system is currently put in place, police officers use racial profiling as a form of to do their job. Um, and this creates unnecessary arrests. And what happens during these arrests oftentimes is that the individual who is arrested feels that they're victims of racial profiling, which causes an aggressive behavior within them, and they overreact with an officer, and this puts them in a situation where they lose control, and the officer now has a valid reason to arrest someone. Um, and this is unfair because police should not have the authority to do that. You should not be arrested because you looked a certain way or you're part of a certain population or ethnicity group. If you committed a crime, then that's what we should base ourselves on and nothing else. The other issue that we run into or that was studied was the judicial bias. And in this study, they basically reviewed the different cases and sentencing processes and found um, that people were being sentenced fairly and equitably. So this is a good approach for us to be able to really dig into our criminal justice system and make a testable difference in what we do. This particular approach here helps us better grasp and understand the areas that need improvement and where we need to focus on. The last thing that we were asked to discuss for our theory was if scholars promote criminal castration to social injustices, is it possible to have a criminal justice system that can be trusted to ever be even handed? Based off of everything we've studied and what history tells us, no. Our criminal justice system will always have some sort of bias. It's just the way we've been developed. It's the way we have. It's the way we've developed our criminal justice system. It's what we know. It's how we handle things. At this point, we've had close to 100 years, if not a few more, of studies that should have allowed us to develop a more equitable criminal justice system. But, in all this time, we haven't found anything. Yes, laws continue to change. Yes, we continue to see more focus in certain areas, but the reality of it is, at the end of the day, is that the statistics are still higher when it comes to minority groups. And to say that we might be able to one day have a criminal justice system that would ever be even-handed would be unreal. We would basically have to go back and change our history, our culture. Um, the issue of slavery has always been a problem. Um, it seems like it's an issue that just we a mentality that still hasn't grown past certain people, and this stems and roots into their families and children's, and it's really something that we need to work past. But it's also part of our history and our culture. So we will always continue to study this. The questions will always be asked, but the mentalities will always be the same. Um, I personally don't feel that the criminal justice system will ever be fair and equitable. Thank you for your time today. Have a good day.